Okay, now we're going to have a look at the transmission. Here are almost all of the parts. There are some small pieces missing. Anyway, we'll start with the cases. Sorry, the case. So, this is the transmission case. One thing we did when we took this apart was we took all of the shafts that came out of it and we tried them on the bushings and pins that they normally run against or run with, and checked for slop. We checked to see that the shafts were loose in the bushings and on this pin, and everything seemed slightly worn, but not worn in an extreme amount. So I would say all of these bushings, these two bushings here, are replaceable. This pin here can be replaced if required, but in my opinion, the ones in this transmission case are quite usable. Other things we want to look at on the case, we want to make sure this surface here, it's a gasket surface, we want to make sure it's clean. It's been cleaned with a single edge razor blade to take any old gasket material off. We want to make sure there aren't any burrs on it where an edge may have got bumped. A quick pass with a flat file would show any high spots from burrs. We'd want to take them off if there were any. We want to make sure this stud is in place, it's right to the bottom, it's like it's screwed in all the way, the threads are in good shape. Dowel holes here and here in good shape. On this side, again, we have a gasket surface here. We want to make sure it's in good shape. It's been cleaned. The dowels are here. The studs are all here. The threads are in good shape. Studs are all in. We want to check the case itself, make sure there aren't any cracks in it. And this is fine. There's a drain plug here, which is still tight, but we'd want to put a new fiber washer on that. We can do that easily. And we have the dipstick threaded in place here. Fiber washer and it's fine, but we may put a new one on it. And the dipstick itself is in good shape. The hole it threads into, the threads are in good shape. We have a mounting lug here where the engine actually bolts to the engine mount in the machine. It's fine, it's worn a little bit. And here, this is where the output bearing and seal go. Those surfaces are in pretty good shape. They're a little marked from bearings going in and back out again, but they look to be no large gouges where the seal could leak, and the surface where the bearing goes. The bearing was a tight fit in there when we took it out, so a new bearing properly installed should fit fine and work. So that case is in good shape. Then the case cover, gasket surface again. We want to make sure it's clean and in good shape, no burrs, no pitting from corrosion. This bushing, and this bushing have been checked again with the shafts that fit in them to make sure there's no large amount of wear. And there's something we want to check. There's a rubber washer in this top hole. This top hole goes behind the clutch lever. That's a seal for the clutch rod so that it doesn't leak oil outside of the transmission. That we should replace. I actually wanted to make sure it was there, but we should replace that. And also on this cover we have a washer with two sets of cylindrical roller bearings. These at the moment are all held together with grease for reassembly, but the bearings should be checked to make sure they're nice and shiny, there's no rust spots on them, and the The surface that they wear on the shaft should be, of course, checked to make sure it's clean, no rust or pitting, and there's a steel collar here, the outer bearing race, for the bearings to run against in the case. If they just ran against the aluminum, of course, they'd wear and damage the aluminum. But the outer race should be checked to make sure it's not rusty or pitted. The pin here for the shift selector is there and it's not tight. Sorry, it's there and it's not loose. It should be tight. We have a plug here. This has a fiber washer on it. The fiber washer should be replaced. I believe that's a oil level drain plug. On this side we have the the clutch lever assembly. It's all here. The lever's there. The bridge is here. The stop is on it for the adjuster. The adjuster's here. Hardware's all here. Here we have the hardware. We have two screws, 2 washers, 1 insulator, and 1 insulator sleeve. So when this holds the contact for the neutral indicator. Neutral indicator contacts a pin on the pinion we're going to look at in a minute that goes here. But this has an insulator missing. Actually, it has 2 insulators missing. It has an insulator sleeve and an insulator plate. When the contact goes on here, it should not touch anything metal. It needs to be insulated from the case, because the wire from the neutral indicator light on the dash is connected to this contact, and this contact should only be grounded when it touches the pin on the pinion that we're going to look at in a second. Anyway, so we'll need to make sure that when this goes back on, the contact goes back on, the insulator sleeve and the other insulator plate are there. We don't have it right in front of us, but there should be nuts and washers on the studs that hold this case cover on. All the nuts should be in good condition. Of course, corners not rounded on them, threads in good shape, and the washers should all fit in the recesses here. So that's the side cover, and it seems to be in good condition, including the bushings in it. Now, sorry, let's just go back one little bit. Where the 2 shafts come through this cover, there's an O-ring here and here. Oop, that one's alive, and it disappeared. Anyway, those O-rings should be replaced. That one, of course, is damaged. The other one doesn't appear damaged, but it's an O-ring. If it's the original one, it's 50 years old. It may be cracked, but they're inexpensive. We'll put a new O-ring on both of those shafts. Next, when this cover comes off, attached to it is the gear selector assembly. This is the major parts of the gear selector assembly. We want to check the surface on the shaft here, make sure it's in good shape, shiny, not corroded. Shaft here, snap ring groove, splines. Now, these splines are not in the best of shape. Look slowly here, we can see some of them have been flattened. Some of them are still quite good. This is where the shift lever goes onto, that connects to the shift lever between the seats of the Penguin or Beaver. I've tried a shift lever on here. It fits. It will clamp. It shouldn't slip. So although these splines are damaged, cosmetically I would say, they should still work fine. So this shaft should work fine. We'll just pull this apart. Everything on here, actually there's not much on here besides the wear points on the shaft and the splines. This all looks good, so that we can reuse. The shift sector, we want to check the teeth on here, teeth here, and where it fits on the other half of the sector assembly. It fits, the gear selector assembly goes on. There's not a lot of play. These teeth appear to be in good shape. These ones have a little bit of wear. These teeth will wear in one position, like these teeth here are worked by a pawl or dog assembly, a ratchet pawl, and the one on each side only wears against half of the tooth. So this tooth here is worn on this side, this tooth is worn on this side. There's light wear there, but they don't seem to be chipped, so I would say that that component is in usable condition. Now, on this, there are a few pieces missing. There's a snap ring that goes here. We'll replace it. It's just a simple snap ring. It's gotten sprung a little bit, so we'll put a new one of those on. And we'll look at the pawls and springs that go in here. Springs that are normally in, part of that is a horseshoe-shaped spring. It's quite often found broken. This one doesn't show any signs of corrosion that's damaged it, so I would say that spring can be returned to use. This spring, which works with the pawls, is also in good shape. It's not cracked, it's not corroded, it doesn't appear to be in a condition where it's going to fail anytime soon. And here we have the pawls that are part of that gear selector. The hole here where they fit on the pivot shaft in the gear selector is fine, but what's quite often damaged, and what's damaged on this one is, if we look at it, it's got 2 points on it, one here and one here. This one is chipped. It's chipped. I don't know if we can see it, but anyway, this tooth, the point here is chipped, and there's another pawl which is actually identical. It's a match set. This tooth is got the point on it, or the point that was on it, broken off. We might be able to compare the two, get a look at them. Anyway, these pawls are damaged to the point where I would say they should be replaced. So, next we'll look at the output shaft. This is the output shaft of the transmission. Gear on it, we want to make sure the teeth are in good shape. We want to make sure these teeth are in good shape, they're not rounded. We want to look inside here is a surface where ball bearings run. I installed the bearings with grease, put the shaft that fits in here on, spun it, feels fine, there's no roughness. The ball bearings all appear to be shiny, they're not pitted, so they should be fine to return to use. There's a brass bushing in here, and this is the output shaft. The input shaft actually goes through it, so the brass bushing allows the two shafts to turn at different speeds. Anyway, the bushings seem fine. I put the shaft in, there's not a lot of play in it. On this shaft here we have a spacer that goes between the gear and the bearing that's been removed. Where the bearing goes, the surface is fine. This collar works with the seal on the transmission case. It's got a little mark in it. You can see a shadow here where the seal runs. I'll actually just polish this with a wire wheel. I believe that'll take that little shadow out of it, but that collar's not pitted or dented, so that should be fine to reuse. Here's the dished washer that goes between the nut and the sprocket that goes on here. It looks fine. The nut is in good shape. Spins easily on the threads. The corners aren't rounded off. The threads are good. The splines here aren't worn narrow in any particular spot, so that output shaft I would say is reusable. Here we have the output sprocket. This is the sprocket that the chain goes on to on the engine. The chain goes between the engine and the jack shaft. This sprocket was on the output shaft, of course. It was a nice tight fit. The teeth here weren't worn, or I should say aren't worn, so nothing was loose. The sprocket wasn't loose on the shaft. The lock screw that holds the nut from turning is there with its washer. This sprocket does have wear on it. It's not worn to the point where the teeth are sharp. There isn't any serious deformation of the shape here. It seems to be fairly even, I would say. So I would say that sprocket is going to be returned to use. Now the output bearing, I did feel a little roughness in it. Like, no, there, it just stopped there, so there is a bit of roughness in it. So I would say we will replace this bearing. We want to take the bearing out, flush any old grease out of it, and spin it and see how it feels. It should be smooth, and this has a little bit of roughness in it, so it looks like just a normal oil seal, except the shape of it here is a little unusual. I believe that's for it to fit, or for the sprocket to fit over it. But anyway, I took this particular seal to where I purchased the replacement bearing, and they weren't able to supply one exactly the same. Fortunately, the guys in England that have all of the parts for these engines, they say they have everything in stock, they have been able to supply a seal that looks exactly like this. And again, this seal is quite likely 50 years old. It wouldn't be a good idea to reuse it if at all possible. Although it looks okay, it may be too hard to seal properly. So we'll put one of those seals in it. Now the pinion I referred to earlier, this looks like a little gear. This goes on the end of the shaft that comes out of the transmission cover. Here's the cover. This goes on the shaft that comes through this hole, and the teeth of this pinion aren't used. This pinion, pardon me, is only used to hold a pin. This pinion is only used to hold a pin, which in this pinion is broken off. In this raised portion here, you see there's a hole there. That should have a pin that looks like a dressmaker's pin, a straight pin. It just comes up with a little domed head on it. That's used as a contact for the neutral indicator. So we may be able to find a pin that works in this, or we should be able to just replace that pinion, or we could install it without the pin and do without a neutral indicator light, which in my experience doesn't work 100% of the time anyway. But anyway, if we want to, we can, there are options. Either replace the pin, we can try to replace the pin, and if that's not successful, we'll get another pinion. Okay, so now on to the interior parts. So this is, sorry, before I pull it apart, over here we have the shift fork assembly and the two shafts with gears from the inside of the transmission. So we're going to start with what's referred to as the counter shaft. This shaft is made up, of course, of a shaft that has a gear as part of it, and 3 sliding gears plus a collar. So these are gears, so what we want to check on them, of course, is all their teeth. These teeth, of course, we want to make sure the surfaces where they contact any gear that they work with are shiny, not pitted, nothing missing, no chips. So that's, all of these gears should be checked that way. Also, these teeth here, where the gears mesh this way, these should be checked to make sure none of these teeth are broken, there aren't any chips out of them, and the corners aren't overly rounded. These have a little bit of wear on them, but everything looks pretty good. Now on this gear, these teeth here should all be perfect because these are used for kickstart, which isn't used in this engine. Now if you have a kickstart on your engine, these teeth should be checked, but anyway, these ones are fine. And as these all rotate on the shaft, their fit on the shaft should be checked. They shouldn't be really sloppy. Sorry, this one rotates on the shaft, these slide on the shaft, and so where they operate on the shaft should be checked to make sure there isn't any excessive play or wear. So since this one rotates, we want to check to make sure it's not really loose on the shaft. It's fine. These ones slide, so we want to check where they slide. The splines here aren't worn. There's no difference in the amount of play as it travels. We want to check these grooves here where the shift forks go. We want to make sure they're not worn. There's a little bit of rust in this one that'll have to be cleaned up, but that should be fine. And this gear, the teeth all look shiny, not chipped. And where these shafts work in the case, here and here, these surfaces, a little bit of minor discoloration, but there's no huge amount of pitting, and we check them in the case and cover for fit, and they seem fine. Go to the shift fork assembly here. This is the shift fork assembly. We want to check these 4 surfaces here and the sides of them for wear. We want to check this pinion, which works with the shift sector. Make sure it's a gear. We want to make sure teeth are shiny, complete, not chipped, not pitted. These surfaces here are actually, this surface here is where the 2 sets of cylindrical bearings work. We want to make sure that's nice and clean. This is where the pinion that indicates neutral goes on. The inside here is wears against the pin in the case. We've checked that against the pin. It seems fine. And these forks turn. One turns, the other one, this is hard to see. If I drive that one to a stop, that one turns, so these all move on the shaft. They should be fine. Now one thing on here, there's a pin held in here with a cotter pin. This cotter pin is corroded, so that cotter pin should be replaced. Other than that, that shift fork assembly looks to me to be in fine usable condition. Okay, here we have the input shaft for the transmission. It is of course a shaft it has a gear as part of it. It has 2 sliding gears and a collar, and this works with the output shaft, which we looked at earlier. So that's actually now the input output shaft. So we want to check, make sure the output shaft and input shaft go together. There isn't a lot of slop in the bushings mentioned in the output shaft previously. We should put the bearings in there, spin this to make sure everything feels fine. The collar, the bearings, the bearing surface and the output shaft are good, which we've already discussed. That's been checked, it's fine. So this collar is in good shape. Splines here are in good shape. We've checked the teeth on this gear are worn a bit. They're slightly rounded. This gear is used to lock this shaft to the output shaft to give us 4th gear. There's a bit of wear there. I don't think it's anything to be concerned about. Bearing surfaces here. Sorry, the wear surfaces here. The wear surfaces here where the shift fork goes seem fine. The teeth of the sprockets look fine. The gears, sorry. However, there's one area of concern on this shaft. See if I can show it here. The teeth on this gear, if I get them in the camera, teeth on this gear should look like that. I can maybe see that that tooth is nice and shiny. That tooth is shiny, that one's shiny, but that tooth has a little bit of pitting in it, right there. This one has pitting, some light pitting, I would say, where it's been rusted. This one's got a little bit of light pitting. This one's a little heavier. Sorry, and this is probably the worst. So, pitted, badly pitted actually. There's some material missing there. Actually, where there's pitting, that means material is missing, and what the pit is a cavity where material is missing. This one actually looks like it has a chip out of it right there. This one has a large chip out of it. Large is in width but not depth. Anyway, those teeth are pitted. Sorry, trying to look at the gear over the camera and keep it in the camera at the same time. Anyway, that's a minor concern. I'm not sure when that gear is under load in the transmission, which gear position the transmission has to be in for this to actually be working. Anyway, that's of minor concern. I don't think any of these teeth would break during use. They might just wear the teeth of the gear that work with it and cause a little bit of noise. Anyway, we'll have to consider replacing that shaft. So, for the transmission, we're going to replace the bearing and seal. Here, output bearing and seal. We're going to replace the O-rings, the seal for the clutch shaft, the clutch rod, pardon me, the gasket that goes between the cover and the case. That's part of the engine rebuild gasket set. The washers on the plug for the oil check level, or the oil level check plug, and the drain plug. Fiber washer on the dipstick. Springs are okay, but we'll replace the pawls, the cotter pin on the shift fork assembly, and possibly the input shaft because of this gear. Now, the only thing not easily found, possibly easily found, this shaft, we may be able to find it used on a certain auction site, or we may be able to go to the Billiards part suppliers in the UK. They may have a new old stock one. Anyway, any parts here that we need, I'm sure we can get them one way or another without a whole lot of expense, and we should be able to put this transmission back together and use it. So next we'll move on to some engine components.